Good afternoon and welcome. I'm John Sallet. Some of you know, and some of you may even remember with some fondness, we hope, that I co-taught the course Big Tech and Competition with John Haig this past fall. John, the director of the Masavar Rahmani Center, is unable to be here today, but I know he would want me to thank you for all coming and to thank the team that's here to present and discuss today. This is part of our Tech and Reg series, including myself, Gene Kimmelman, most notably of all, Tom Wheeler, the former chair of the Federal Communications Commission, Nancy Rose, the economist who some of you have seen lecture here. Before we go to today's topic, though, I want to do just a couple of programming notes. So first, fingers crossed, we believe that ProMarket, do people see ProMarket? Do people know what it is? It's published by the Stigler Center at the University of Chicago on competition news. And tomorrow it's slated to have a piece by John Haig and Nancy Rose and myself, because tomorrow is a big anniversary. It's an anniversary. It's the 150th year of 150th anniversary of the first telephone call, which was made about 3.5 miles from here, close to the Boston Public Gardens and the Boston Common. And so we have a piece tomorrow talking about what lessons one might have learned from the 150 years of government interacting with telephony that would be applicable in the age of digital monopolies. Indeed, the course that we teach, focusing on AI, on big tech, on monopolization cases, on regulation, deals with the same issues. And so today we're lucky to have another topic, be introduced by Gene Kimmelman. We will continue this series. On March 23rd, we have a speaker coming that I hope people will be able to attend, the special session for Ori Schwartz, who heads the competition analysis at the OECD, who brings a global perspective to questions of AI competition, dynamic competition. I believe it was a poet, a Nobel Prize winner in literature, who said, "He not busy being born is busy dying." And in the AI marketplace these days, we see markets being born and maybe markets dying, monopoly being created, perhaps, current monopolies, as Tom Wheeler talked about recently, perhaps taking advantage of their incumbent monopoly positions. Ori is going to be here to give us a global perspective on AI issues. So now Gene. I've known Gene for a long time. Gene's had a lot of jobs. We've all had a lot of jobs. But the thing is, Gene's really only done one thing. And the one thing is to stand for the public interest. He has stood throughout his career for people who can't afford to hire lobbyists, people who can't read the technical or arcana language of legal proceedings to understand how it will affect them personally in the world of telecommunications and antitrust, people who could be disserved by monopolization or bad governmental decisions, but might not find out about it until their prices go up, their innovation is slowed, quality goes down. Gene's done this from a variety of vantage points. 2 stints in the United States Department of Justice, focusing on competition policy. Long leadership at the nonprofit Public Knowledge, which has been a fervent fighter for competition. And Tom and I were at the Federal Communications Commission when Gene was telling us again and again what to do, and he basically was right. A fabulous advocate, somebody who wants to make sure that the next generation of public interest leaders learn the lessons that he has been teaching for years. And he so continues his work not only here at the Masavar Rahmani Center, but also at the Tobin Center at Yale. So to talk about a critical pending antitrust issue, please welcome Gene Kimmelman.
Thank you, John. Wow. you guys have no idea how much I had to pay him to do that. That was, very expensive. No, thank you. Um, okay, so yeah, I've done a lot of things, and I started my career with the breakup of AT&T. So I'm really excited to be here with you today. Hopefully, you're getting some good food. Thank you for coming, because we're going to talk about what might be the next breakup in U.S. antitrust law. Um, but let me frame it first. Um, I need to thank Rebecca Collins for helping put this together. She did tremendous work, and she's going to be responsible for showing you what I should be saying. Okay, so she's on top of the slide deck, and thank you, Rebecca, for what you did. Here's the framing. I think that's important. We all know digital platforms have exploded. Google, Apple, Amazon, Facebook owner Meta, all dominating our economy, dominating global economy. And this has occurred at a time when there's been this resurgent interest in antitrust, understanding that we have enormous concentrations of power and players who play a dominant role in our society. But what we've seen in the recent cases that have come down as this aggressive antitrust has been implemented, a lot of disappointments, some cases being lost, some being won, but then getting a fairly weak remedy. Today, and I don't have the details of it, one of the major monopolization cases the government and states brought against Live Nation Ticket, the combined company with Ticketmaster, has settled their case where they had sought a breakup for much less. There may be some divestitures and some ticketing interoperability requirements. I don't know all the details, but certainly not a breakup. So here we are to talk about the AdTech case, because I think this is the one that really is most likely to lead to our next breakup. So we're going to look at what this AdTech universe kind of looks like first, what the Department of Justice and the state attorneys general allege to be violations of the antitrust laws, how Google, the defendant, defended itself, what it basically argued, how the Judge Brinkema, district court judge, looked at all this evidence and made specific findings, and then ruled for the government on many counts. We're going to look at then what the proposed remedies are. Europe also has a case. We're going to glance at that as well. And then I want you, with that information, to decide. You're the jury today in this case. Is a breakup warranted for Google's ad tech business? Okay, so the advertising market didn't always look like this. It used to be a lot of print ads, classified ads. It used to be an awful lot of direct dealing between a company that has content, newspaper, magazine, advertisers wanting to promote brands, products, services, and whether it was the 3 martini lunch or whether it was some other kind of meeting, they'd get together and there'd be these big conversations. And it was not targeted, and it was very general. It was based on a lot of intuitive understanding of things they thought about consumer behavior and where it would be useful to spend a lot of money on advertising. World has changed dramatically. In a computer-driven framework, online content, we now have an explosion of what's called programmatic advertising. These are networks that bring together all of the publishers' material, networks that bring together all those interested in advertising, ad agencies, advertisers, companies that are promoting their brand, and driving it all through a real-time auction process and an exchange. That's the world. So this case is all about that new world of advertising. Now, is it the whole world of advertising? Well, no, think about it. You get ads on search. If you're in Facebook, You get fed ads that are driven in a kind of closed network, walled garden run by Meta, the parent company. So there's all kinds of advertising, as there is traditional advertising. But this is a segment that is really important. You look at its key components. Um, Google is in these spaces. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But Google, starting with its search business exploding in 2000s, gathering massive amounts of data, understanding that advertising could really fuel its business, starts looking at other properties and buys a company called DoubleClick, which is a leader in this whole programmatic advertising business, both on the what's called the buy side and the sell side. On the advertiser side, where you're buying inventory space, on the publisher side, where you're selling that space. So Microsoft looks like they're about to go after DoubleClick. Google jumps in and says, no way, we're offering more money, we're going to get it. Government approves the transaction. Come back to that too. Another company is purchased a few years later, AdMeld, which was used to help optimize positioning for publishers' ability to understand how to get the highest bids for advertising on their content. Google buys AdMeld as well. So this becomes an explosion area of growth for Google's advertising. And frankly, if you look at the market, you think about this, this is kind of like a version of a stock exchange. You can imagine people with computers at desk, all the content. It's not just like the New York Times selling space to an advertiser. It's every publisher, Podunk News, Trade Rags, all kinds of content providers aggregated on a platform where everything is digitized, everything moves quickly. These transactions that are described here happen in the time it takes for you to load a web page. Milliseconds to work through which ad goes with which content based on the top bid that the publisher says yes to. And billions of these per day. A total transformation of a segment of the advertising business as we know it. And what you see is, with its acquisitions and with its own internal growth, Google is everywhere. They're providing these massive services to publishers. Publishers find this to be immensely valuable. I mean, they're filling up space that had gone barren before, no monetization, just the content itself. You read it and that's great, you're the consumer, but they're not making any extra money other than your subscription. A lot of space, no advertising. This fills in that space because the computerized tools can customize who might have an interest in one aspect of your content, and it's across the whole universe of publishers. So publishers find this to be extremely valuable, particularly at a time when print is dying up, everything's going digital, they're losing their classified advertising if they're in the newspaper side of things, and they're desperately looking to monetize around their content, right? So Google is kind of a savior in this space. Advertisers also see this is just unbelievably valuable to get more pinpoint targeted information. What were purely intuitive and guesses before about, oh, if you're reading the sports section, maybe you want a Jeep. Well, we're not sure if you're going to buy a Jeep, but we think it's a good chance it was that kind of thing. Here it's extremely tailored information that relates to very personalized advertising because of the demographic information, the data that Google and others have. Now, Google isn't the only player here. There are a bunch of other players on serving publishers. There are all kinds of ad buying tools on the other side, and there are a number of different exchanges. But with those acquisitions that Google had, with DoubleClick and AdMeld, with their acumen, they become the go-to place for online web display advertising. So great for both sides, a bunch of money for Google in the middle. Each one of these functions involves a cost to the advertiser who's trying to get eyeballs. And you're paying whoever is the intermediary offering the services. Google takes in a good share of that. But so as that happens, publishers start wondering, after they make a lot of money on this, whether they're making enough, whether they're really getting full value. They're filling up space, they're getting some money, but is it enough? A lot of complaints to Google about share your data. This is a really opaque process. I mean, it's going at, like, as they say, it's milliseconds for a transaction. Nobody can like follow it in granular detail, but they want like a readout from Google. Google's not very interested in that. Say, you get your money, we do all this for you, trust us, this is how it works. This goes on for a while. Publishers start talking with others in the industry about whether there's, if we can't get things directly from Google, can we get more competition to help us out here? Are there other ad networks we could be using? Are there other ways to get to those advertisers who really want to be engaged on our with our content? I'm not going to go into great details here, but they come up with, through a number of software middlemen, a great idea of what was called header bidding, which where it looked like Google was maybe with their own exchange, maybe they were putting their thumb on the scale for themselves. Maybe they were like, you know, not being fair to everybody else. They couldn't really figure this out. So it's like, well, let's find a way around that. If they look like they're doing something, let's make sure we get tools that guarantee that the bids from each exchange all come in simultaneously. Nobody first, no kind of delays, nobody pushed off onto the side. It's all the same. It's open competition. And we'll get to see whether we're really getting, you know, the best bids for our content. Google starts shifting some of its auction practices, some of its security requirements, finds all kinds of problems with dealing with anyone doing header bidding, all kinds of difficulties, claims, you know, the problem with the auction is this is all big money. Everybody wants to game the system. Everybody wants to come out ahead. It's our exchange. We want to make sure we're policing it carefully. We want to make sure that we've got control over this. We want to make sure it's secure. We want to make sure that there's integrity in the system. So this goes on. Finally, the government, through Department of Justice and state attorneys general, sue Google for monopolization. Now, the reason I described that portion of the advertising industry wasn't the whole thing. I'm going to come back to this in a minute. This is a whole question of what is the market. But for now, the government looks at what Google has been doing and finds a number of things to be problematic. Two categories: one, manipulating the auction in a variety of ways. That's the first look, last look, dynamic revenue shares, unified pricing rules, all variations of Google gaming its own system as alleged by the government. And unlawful tying, because what Google was doing, once it had all the publishers really into its system, using DoubleClick for publishers, the tools that enabled publishers to get all this great advertising. Once it was there, it said, if you're going to use our exchange, you need to use DoubleClick for publishers. They tied the two together, said this was important for efficiency, security, integration. They pushed all publishers who were already using all their tools. Said, if you want, you can really use a different exchange. There are other ones out there, but you can't use DoubleClick for publishers in. That was what all publishers were growing dependent on, and felt like it was important and it was critical to use the exchange because guess what? Those advertisers who were finding all this precise pinpoint demographic information that was making it much better to advertise more at lower prices, they were running a lot of their business through Google's exchange. So the government finds this is unlawful tying. And all of these tricks you're using, you look at the bids first and you get a right of refusal. You see, that's great. Some advertiser is going to bid a lot for this content. I'm going to run it through my exchange. That's the winning bid. They could move themselves to the front of the queue on their exchange. And then where there was a lot of back and forth on different bids and different exchanges and publishers looking at, they saw that something else was outbidding the players on their exchange. They would just bid a penny more. So if you think about bidding, you never know whether you need to bid a penny, a dollar, or $10, right? I mean, it's like, you're buying a house. Is somebody's bidding against you? Do you just up it a little bit or do you go, you never know. So Google was making sure it wasn't leaving any money on the table this way and squeezing the prices to maximize their profits. So a variety of these gimmicks were going on. And every time publishers came up with something new, Google came up with a variation on how it needed to do the pricing in its exchange. Okay. Government says, this is what you did wrong, and you're a monopoly on the publisher side. You're a monopoly on this exchange, and you're a monopoly in the advertising network market. Okay. So Google says, okay, we do some things, but we don't know what you're talking. There's no monopoly here. The same advertisers are on Facebook. A lot of companies are selling on Amazon. Not just a lot, millions. Publishers' content is found in Facebook. I mean, it's all over the place. Every social network, virtually every online marketplace is monetizing in the same way. The display advertising business is just one piece of a big puzzle. And even if it's not, even if you somehow think it's somewhat separate, I mean, look at what we're doing here. We have brought all these players together, these tools together. It's efficient, it's vertically integrated. It cuts out a lot of middlemen. We know how to get you the best value for your dollar or for your content. And we're running billions of these transactions a day. This isn't easy. We keep getting better and better. You got to put it all together. So it's all about efficiencies of integration, right? So the judge doesn't buy that. The government also argued, as you remember, I said in the earlier slide, that Google had purchased DoubleClick and AdMeld and was building this juggernaut. Government had alleged that each of those purchases were also monopolistic for cornering the market. So the judge looks at all of this and says, the actual transactions themselves were not violations of the Sherman Act. There were not attempts to monopolize these markets. Google was trying to expand into new areas. Yeah, they were big in search, but this was a whole different ballgame. This was programmatic advertising. They were a small player, and this was a good asset. This was not something where they were taking out a competitor. They were actually building their business. So judge doesn't find that to be convincing at all. But she did find violations of law. So let's look at this a little bit more carefully. did she get it right? I mean, she sort of bought the government's argument that this is a significant segment and it's unique because it's the open web, it's not a closed walled garden, and it's this real-time bidding process. So it's kind of special. Just like in other parts of advertising, no one thinks that a radio advertisement is the same as a television advertisement or a print advertisement. I mean, there can be different markets, right? So it's not. So she basically buys the government's argument. These are separate markets. Um, but then she looks at, how can you kind of sense that this is sort of unique and special, very fact specific to this. So as I said, the publishers are basically feel like they're stuck. They got into something because they thought it was a good thing. Then they can't get resolution of quality questions, transparency questions, pricing questions, but they're afraid to leave because all the advertisers go through AdX, the exchange, Google, and AdX is tied to DoubleClick for publishers. So you have to use the publisher's tools and the exchange. So she sees that the publishers seem to be in a really tough situation. She looks at the exchange and sees that, again, because of that dependency across the market, publishers can't go somewhere else without getting the advertisers who work through AdX. She says that really looks like this is a special market too. Like the exchange is being used in a particular way by each of the players. But then when she gets to the advertising ad network, different result. And this is, I think, interesting, and we're going to talk about the breakup remedy in a little bit, but keep this in mind. She doesn't quite buy it here. She says, wait a minute, a lot of the evidence that came in from different players in the advertising industry, they didn't talk about the market as a dependency here. They actually said, we're agnostic. If we can get a better deal on Facebook, we'll go there. And we do a lot on search and we do a lot on YouTube, and we're advertising in a lot of different ways to a lot of different people. And we don't think that, we like to use Google's product for the real-time bidding process, but it's just a piece of the puzzle. So this is one where the judge says, I don't really see that this is itself a market. Now keep in mind, she's saying they're leveraging the fact that a lot of advertisers use this and that this is a very valuable property, but she's not finding a market. Is that or is that not significant? We'll come back to that. But she has to decide, after seeing the practices that she found to be problematic, how do I actually delineate what is a monopoly here? How do I do this? So there are a variety of ways in antitrust law, and we're not going to do deep dive antitrust here, but just to look at quickly what she highlighted. They're pretty much kind of classical elements. Google just dominates the publisher ad network market. I mean, 91% share, very similar to the Google search case. I mean, we almost have the market totally cornered. Kind of looks like a monopoly, doesn't it? The ad exchange, it's a much lower market share. But so then she looks at what's going on in the market, and she's finding that with these interrelationships across the networks and the exchange, the dependencies kind of make it maybe not as big a deal to be at a higher market share when you look at how difficult it is to enter, you look how difficult it is to switch from one exchange to another. Publishers didn't want to do it, were afraid to do it. And so she finds it really interesting. Google says, yeah, out of $100 spent by advertisers in this market, yeah, we get $20 for the exchange. And it's not like it hasn't gone up over time. She looks at it and says, other exchanges are charging much less. and Google shares aren't going down. People are paying because they really feel kind of stuck. Now, is it a higher quality product? Could be. I mean, nothing was definitive, but she took that take rate to be very indicative of durability of power in the market, which was very important to her reasoning. Okay, so then let's look a little bit more carefully at the specifics of what these practices were, because not enough to show that Google is a monopoly in display advertising. There have to be anti-competitive actions. Okay. So this is how she broke it down. And again, I want you to think about this in the context of what you think the remedy should be. Tying together the exchange and DoubleClick for publishers. Section 1 has to do with contracts, coordination, activities of multiple players in the market. She found this to be a direct tying relationship between those two players in the market, per se violation of Section 1. Okay, illegal tie. And that having found a monopoly we wouldn't have mattered either the publisher's side or the exchange, that would constitute a violation of Section 2 of the Sherman Act, maintenance of monopoly. And then these other practices that all relate to gaming the exchange. She says each of these is an indication of how Google is just putting its thumb on the scale, favoring itself, harming others. And they would use a new tactic every time either the advertisers or the publishers would complain about something vociferously enough to where Google actually felt like they needed to respond, which wasn't always, but enough. And you could just see modifications in the auction structure, modifications in the auction process, each time justified by the fact that somebody is always trying to game our system. We have to protect the integrity of it. It's like it's our ecosystem. We're going to make sure it runs the way we think it should. Many of these found to be harming the ability of others to actually grow in the marketplace. So let's look at what Judge Brinkema says here. This is kind of how she encapsulated it at the end. Google's monopolies in the publisher, server, and exchange market enhanced the tie, enabled Google to introduce a series of anti-competitive policies because everyone was tied to them. Practice and technology changes on the sell side, ad tools that were not in the publisher's best interest were all forced on them. This was Google's decision. It wasn't what the publishers necessarily wanted. And the changes decreased product quality and harmed competition. Google could hold on to its dominant position and become more entrenched. So, what's the scorecard here? Now we're getting to the fun part. With these results, high market share, dominant position, barriers to entry, durability of power, difficulty switching, these practices, what do you do? Well, government thinks it's pretty straightforward. States and DOJ come in and say, you need a remedy that stops them from doing what they were doing, doesn't allow it to just pop back up. It's pretty straightforward, right? By preventing entry, using that power of durable control, you got to find some way to actually open the market to competition, right? Because it's not working that way right now. There may be ill-gotten gains. Were they overpricing? Were they harming the quality of the products and services? Somehow there's this question of some level of kind of compensation, but really taking away what were those benefits of monopoly that they should have never had in the first place. Okay. And then, of course, you want to end up with a result where you don't have to go through all this again, and deter further violations. So those are the concepts the government comes up with. And so what they ask for is pretty obvious. Based on that, the divestiture of the exchange, government says there's an inherent conflict of interest here. You're a dominant position on the sell side. You have a major stake on the buy side. You're doing all these practices. That exchange is being used in ways that are hard to police, and therefore you should sell it, not be in that business, period. But maybe that's not enough, because you've got 91% share of the publisher's business in the in the double-click for publishers world. And if we're not seeing anything happening quickly just with the divestiture of the exchange, probably really should have to divest that whole publisher business as well. In the interim, we want you to open up the exchange as the divestiture process goes forward to kind of like an interoperability requirement. Bring in transparency where you were totally opaque before, and allow really kind of interconnection of other auction networks to work with yours. And then, of course, we want to monitor this for a long period of time. So that's what the government asked for. Now, remember, John Sal's presentation on Google search case, Judge Mehta got hit with a lot of the same kinds of requests from the government, that after finding liability for in the search market, that Google should divest its Chrome browser. If that didn't work, possibly divest the Android operating system. And then a whole variety of other things, again, like these other anti-competitive practices, exclusivity, revenue sharing, default status in the Android ecosystem, default status on iOS, were all major asks that needed to be addressed. So there are a lot of similarities to what the government came in with, as the same logic in this case and that, but Judge Mehta trimmed almost all of that down and rejected the divestitures. Little data sharing, limited, you really couldn't have exclusive contracts, but you have 1-year payment systems. I mean, basically rejecting a lot of what the government had asked for there. So here, is it different? Well, the only thing different that I can see right up front is that the government came in day one and said, Google is violating the law in the display advertising market. We're going to show you that it's a market, and they need to divest. They were banging from day one for divestiture. This is what this is all about. In the search case, it was more nuanced and kind of, it was always there, but not quite as much beating on the judge with it. Okay, so how do you decide whether a breakup is justified? Again, I don't want to do detailed antitrust here, but the Microsoft case from more than 20 years ago, the government had asked for a split of the browser and operating system. District court judge granted that in finding that Microsoft had monopolized the market. But the appellate court overturned the district court and gave a whole variety of descriptions of why it found the government hadn't presented enough detailed evidence, maybe enough clarity of causation, a lot of gaps in what it thought the government provided. Judge Mehta, when he was considering the Google search uh, request after finding liability, goes through and kind of in his remedy decision describes Microsoft. There are many different ways I could have done this. I just thought I'd bring these up because I think it just shows you a little bit of the mindset of the judge. None of this is exactly ironclad law. This is just the sensibilities of the judge of, wow, if I'm going to break up a company, I had inferential evidence of monopolization. I had a lot of indirect evidence, couldn't absolutely prove everything with clarity, but I don't have to for liability. But when you get to this kind of a remedy, you see judges doing here, Judge Mehta kind of pausing and saying, do I have enough? Did they have, yeah, I didn't find that they had a great efficiencies argument, but they were providing a very good product and people liked it. I mean, there was a lot of quality. So you see a lot of hemming and hawing here as to what it takes for a remedy of that severity from the judge's point of view. And they want to make sure it really is necessary. I mean, is there something short of a breakup that might suffice to meet those different goals of what a remedy should be doing? So how might that influence the AdTech case? Well, here I've just kind of done devil's advocate here, that if you're kind of on the Google side, let's just say, for simplicity, how you want to take that cautionary language from Judge Mehta, his image of what Microsoft stands for, and how you'd want to use it. And here you'd be like, maybe very worried that there wasn't a breakup in Google search. And now the judge is going to say, well, there's not, the government went to break up Live Nation and now they've just settled for much less than that. And the government sued Meta for its acquisition of Instagram and WhatsApp, and the case was dismissed. So a lot of these judges may be, looking at this and saying, am I the first one since Judge Harold Green in 1982 deciding to break up Ma Bell, the Bell system? Am I the one to do that? I don't know. Maybe, but some concern there. So does it matter that she found that the acquisition of AdMeld and DoubleClick were not in and of themselves violations of law? Clearly, the tools that were built with them fueled the anti-competitive behavior that she found to be at the core of this case, and found Google had broken the law. But does it matter that the actual acquisitions weren't illegal? And then even again, she didn't buy the arguments of Google's defense that we have to do all of this for efficiency's sake. But yeah, I mean, are there some benefits of integrating these services? I mean, everything's moving so fast. It's a dynamic market, so you could see that being a problem. And then at the hearing, when she was considering the oral arguments of both sides, she kind of went out of her way to say, time is of the essence. We've been doing this for a few years. The government took a number of years to bring the case. She saw violations of law, illegal activity. She wants it stopped, and she wants something done. So she's kind of hankering to get something done. She knows the case will always be appealed, but certainly a structural remedy will be appealed and stayed. It won't happen for a number of years, even if the Court of Appeals affirms a breakup requirement. And so she's seemingly concerned how hard will it be to find a buyer? How long will this take? She's just concerned about the mechanics. And again, shows the mindset of a judge. I have an important job here. But am I restructuring an industry? Am I fully restructuring a major dominant company in the global economy? Uh, so I don't know. A lot of things that could be giving her pause. But would that be right? Is that what should happen? Think about it. Google is on both sides of the market and running the auction that drives both sides. Advertisers can go elsewhere. We're going to get to Europe in a minute, where the Europeans don't think it's quite as easy, but she finds they can go elsewhere. But publishers are stuck. Almost everybody has disappeared from that whole publisher ad platform business. The other exchange networks are not growing. They're not that vibrant. Google is at that 60-some% market share. And every time somebody came up with a way of getting around Google's oversight of the exchange, came up with a new way to fix it so that it couldn't happen. Header bidding, gone. You do this first look, last look. People complain, oh no, we'll go to unitary. Don't worry, we're not doing that anymore. We're doing this other thing. Is that going to ever change? Don't they have an inherent conflict of interest when they're making money on each of these pieces, and they can grab 20 cents on the dollar right in the middle? Nobody else is able to do that, but everybody's got to pay. It's not a bad business, right? So this is a tough one for Judge Brinkema. But I think that when you talk about the levels of connectedness of a remedy to the anti-competitive behavior, what we've seen as the behavior in the market over a lengthy period of time, and these inherent conflicts, I don't know. I mean, should she be swayed by these concerns? Well, let's look quickly at what Europe is doing, because there's a similar case in Europe, right? Been litigated. Article 102, slightly different legal framework, but not very different. Google found to have violated the law in Europe, has been fined, and the European Commission said this really should require a structural remedy, a divestiture. Okay. So how did they look at it? They looked at it a little differently. Standard slightly different. There's abusive dominance. They had previously found Google had abused dominance in favoring its own shopping services years ago and had been self-preferencing. They used that as a model for this. And here they say Google is dominant in both the buy and the sell side. They don't find the kind of nuances Judge Brinkema did about the advertising market. And interestingly, they described the exchange as just kind of like the conduit through which these two dominant pillars of Google's empire are blocking everyone else and preserving their dominant position and favoring their own business. So the exchange becomes less of a factor, but it's just a different legal framework for getting at the exact same behaviors, the exact same problem. They used a different auction element to find Google just self-preferencing, again, because it could kind of look at each, in a waterfall, look at each tier of pricing that's coming through, game it to make sure that they won whatever they thought was worth winning in the auction process. So Europe says we need to consider structural remedies, but have not done that. And many people believe they're waiting for Judge Brinkema. Some people believe Judge Brinkema is waiting for Europe. Another factor just to flag here is that there are a lot of private cases here. Now that we found liability, there are a lot of publishers who are suing Google for damages and using the liability ruling to kind of get themselves a little bit of a head start to get into court to show how they have been harmed by Google not giving them fair compensation for the ad placements or network. So I thought by the time this presentation was going to happen that we actually were going to have a remedies decision. So now you guys have to make that decision before Judge Brinkema. What do you think? Yeah. Who thinks they should break them up? We got a few. Okay, who thinks they definitely shouldn't break them up? Okay. I mean, Google says we shouldn't be broken up. Google says, you know, let us keep the assets and we'll be more transparent, we'll be more open. You know, we'll get rid of some of these practices. Is that enough? I don't have too many breakup people here, huh? Is there a way to make that ad network truly non-discriminatory, interoperable across all other exchanges and publisher networks? Can you really do it? I think this is a hard one. We'll see what Judge Brinkema does. But does it matter? People weren't too forceful in their hand raising, so either you're not sure or maybe it doesn't matter. Okay, here's why maybe it doesn't matter. In the online display advertising market that we've been talking about here, that Judge Brinkema found to be substantially monopolized, how much advertising revenue do you think Google makes? Any guesses? What if I said $30+ billion? Does that sound plausible? I think it's about accurate. Okay. Remember, they had a take rate of 20%, and others exchanges only had like 10%. So that's double for a piece of that 30 billion. Some of it is on the advertiser side, some of it's on the publisher side. Do you know how much money Google makes in advertising? Alphabet makes in advertising? Sean Sallet may know this. They make a lot in search, don't they? More than $250 billion a year. This is peanuts. Oh, it's real money. I mean, some percentage of 30 billion, if you made the market competitive, would disappear. Is it potentially $10 billion, $5 billion for publishers? Absolutely. Is that real money? Absolutely. They deserve it? I think so. But it's not huge as compared to what Google does with search and even off of Gmail and YouTube. So maybe it's not that big a deal. Well, but let's think about this for a minute. Come on. We have elevated monopolization law in the last 10, 15 years to do things it hasn't been doing for much of the last 30 or 40 years, Microsoft case accepted, has been quieter, harder cases, difficult to prove, tremendous amount of work for law enforcement. It's now elevated at a time when we have these dominant platform players who are clearly driving the economy. Don't we need remedies that work? in these markets? I think the answer is yes. We broke up the Bell system. It unleashed massive innovation in the adjacent markets, created all kinds of opportunities. I don't know that this has the potential to do that, but even if it doesn't, maybe it does some. But then the most important point, I think, is this last one. With the explosion in AI, with superscalers, guess who they all are? You know who they all are. It's these same companies we've been talking about, who have very great products and services, but they have enormous advantages to everybody else in a market where scale matters. And positioning in the stack probably matters as well, where they have massive investments across different elements of the investments necessary to build these new foundation models, the best generative AI. We could end up with just a couple players winning. Isn't it most important to have a law that not only can be used to discern any competitive behavior, find it in the most complex and fast-moving markets, but also deliver a remedy that can restructure those markets to be more competitive? That's why I think this case is so important for Judge Brinkman to come down hard on. I don't know if she can be upheld on appeal. I think there's, as you heard, I think there are good arguments, but we've seen a lot of caution from judges. So, Rebecca, what should happen? Yeah, you want to. She did all the work, so she knows.
Yeah, no, I think that there's a strong legal case for breaking them up, but I don't think that she will.
Okay. Well, I know we need to wrap up. I'm going to stay for a bit of time after, but I know we need to wrap up for many of you to get to classes.
Right.
And whatnot.
We promised we would wrap up. Please join me in thanking Gene Kimmelman. Program